Do you know where the water goes when you flush your toilet or take a shower? It's a dirty subject, but it could be affecting your health. Maui Tomorrow takes a look at wastewater disposal and injection wells to help you understand why you should care.
Tonight, we look at how Maui disposes of its wastewater. Find out why a grassroots group of concerned citizens is asking Maui County to phase out this questionable practice and instead reuse these waters for irrigation. Every day, an average of over 13 million gallons of treated sewage, called wastewater, is pumped 200 feet into the ground at Maui's 3 wastewater reclamation facilities in Kahului, Lahaina, and Kihei, with only 3 million gallons of wastewater treated to a higher irrigation use quality and reused. Add that up over the years, and you have billions of gallons of nutrient-rich effluent injected into the ground, migrating towards the ocean. Once it reaches our nearshore waters, this nutrient-rich effluent fuels algae blooms, smothering our coral reefs and producing bacteria, which creates health concerns for ocean users. Meanwhile, precious drinking water is used to irrigate golf courses, parks, resorts, and other large properties, reducing the reserve in our county's aquifers. At a time of multi-year drought, water shortages, and conflicts over water rights, does it really make sense to waste our valuable waters this way? This episode of Protecting Maui's Future takes a closer look at the issue of water reuse and the phasing out of injection wells at the county's wastewater treatment plants. A group of concerned citizens has formed a coalition called DIRE, Don't Inject, Redirect. Joining us for this evening's discussion is a member of the DIRE Coalition and the Mayor's Wastewater Community Working Group, water quality consultant Robin Knox. Welcome, Robin. Thanks so much for joining us. Injection wells and water reuse, these seem to be hot topics in the news lately. I'm wondering if we can start off by telling the viewers a little bit about DIRE Coalition and what this organization is all about.
Sure. DIRE Coalition's a really interesting group of very diverse, concerned citizens in our community. And they really have a lot of different concerns, like restoration of stream flow to streams that are diverted, and protecting the coral reef from the wastewater injection. Some of them are developers interested in water supply. You know, there's all different angles to this water resource problem. But the one thing that we all agree on is that it is a big waste of our water to inject over 10 million gallons a day when we could be reusing that water for irrigation.
Okay. Now, injection wells are widely used throughout the country, so why is this a problem for Maui?
They are, in fact, widely used throughout the country. There's hundreds of thousands of them. But a lot of those are for deep injection, returning salt water back to the place where it came from in the first place, or sometimes for other types of waste disposal. But the use of injection wells in shallow, relatively shallow, several hundred feet is relatively shallow for an injection well, in coastal areas has proven problematic everywhere that they're used. And on Maui, we now have definitive scientific evidence that the treated sewage is coming out in the water in the near shore of the ocean, right where we're swimming, right on the Kaanapali coast, right on the Kihei coast, where the coral is, where the fisheries are, and it's causing great problems and disturbances there.
Okay, and I guess the idea back when these first started appearing in Maui in the early 90s, I believe, was that the injectate would come out in much deeper waters farther from shore, and we really find now that they are coming up very close in the nearshore waters.
Right. 2 independent studies, one by University of Hawaii, one by the U.S. Geological Survey, have confirmed the presence of sewage effluent from our wastewater treatment plants in our nearshore waters. That is not under question. That is clear.
Okay. Tell me just a little something about the actual injection well. How deep does that go down in the ground?
Injection wells are a vertical hole in the ground that's, deeper than it is wide. And the water, in fact, here, we don't even have to pressurize it to inject it because our geology is so permeable. And that is, in fact, why the water is coming out in the ocean. That is how the water on this island moves. So the wastewater is injected into the groundwater, and it joins the massive groundwater that's moving out to the ocean every day naturally. Okay. But in the areas of injection wells, we see some very pronounced signatures of disturbance of the ecosystem, overgrowth of macroalgae, and they outcompete the coral, and they're smothering and killing the coral. And we just see a general decline in fisheries, because when you lose the coral, you lose all the food of the food chain that the fish need and the turtles need and all the other animals need.
And Robin, tell me now, isn't the water that goes into those injection wells treated to some level?
It is treated. In fact, the County of Maui does better than the minimum EPA standards. But even though the pollutants are greatly reduced, the amount that remains goes out to the ocean, and can still affect the reef. For instance, the nutrients can cause overgrowth of the algae. Toxic chemicals and pharmaceuticals can affect the reproduction of fish and other aquatic life. And the bacteria can be harmful both to aquatic life and to human health. There are allegations that many people believe that they are getting illness from the ocean. It's been long known that gastrointestinal illnesses could be transferred by water, but now some people think that skin infections like staph and respiratory infections could be possibly carried by waters as well.
Okay.
So,
and with all the conversation going on in the county right now about scarcity of water, water rights, all of those things, one issue that comes up time and time again is water reuse. So how does that come into play with the injection wells and the wastewater treatment plants?
Well, I think we can all agree, like I said, even the diverse members of the Dire Coalition agree that wasting 10 million gallons a day of fresh water is ludicrous. That's, over the last 11 years, 51 billion gallons of fresh water. The Commission on Water Resources Management just ordered that stream diversions be reduced to return flow to the streams. And they were saying like 2 million gallons a day for some of these streams to be restored. Well, that is 5 Maui streams, potentially, that we could restore with water that we are instead polluting and throwing on the reef where it's killing the reef.
And so what I hear is 2 levels of treatment. R1 is a term that comes up often. That's an upgraded treatment of water, and if we had those R1 lines, that could possibly go back to agriculture on the island. We could be using that water rather than dumping it for detrimental effects in the nearshore waters. We could be treating it to a higher grade and reusing it back on the land. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there's several levels, like we said, of treatment. There's the levels I talked about at first, which are, removing chemicals and oxygen-demanding chemicals, and then removing nitrogen's the next thing. But then we get to the end of the process, and they have what's called disinfection, and that's reducing harmful bacteria and viruses. And that process, we only have enough capacity to treat part of our wastewaters in that way. And the part that goes, for instance, to be used in parks or schools or, recreational areas, it has to meet that very highest quality of R1. But agriculture, like sugarcane, that isn't a food crop, or people out there in contact with it, they could use even lesser quality called R2, but it would still be disinfected, just a little bit more bacteria or viruses are allowed. But what I don't understand is that the water that is injected into the groundwater and comes out where we're swimming and where the reef is, that water is not required to be disinfected at this time by the permits that the county holds from EPA and the Department of Health. Now, there are water quality standards, and it is part of the county's duties as a discharger to comply with those standards. So this is why many people have mentioned the Clean Water Act and said there are additional permits needed that would have more strict requirements, because the way the wells are regulated now, it's only for the protection of drinking water, and it's not for the protection of ocean water. And many people think, well, drinking water, that must be the highest level of protection, right? Because that's what we drink. But in fact, water that humans can drink could be very harmful to aquatic life and ecosystems. For instance, the standard for humans for nitrogen is, or for nitrates, which is just one form of nitrogen, is 10 milligrams per liter, which is pretty high. For the ocean, it's 150 parts per billion, or micrograms per liter. That's like billions of times less can go to the ocean than can go to our drinking water.
See, and you and others are actively out there testing these waters these days, right? You're in the water getting water samples, and don't you find also pharmaceuticals, traces of pharmaceuticals in the water along with these other things?
That's right. The types of problems we're seeing are the nutrients, as we've already mentioned, the bacteria, and then the third thing is toxicity or toxic compounds, including pharmaceuticals. And the pharmaceuticals especially are damaging because they have the effects on the organisms that they do on us. For instance, birth control pills are detectable in effluents, and they cause animals to change gender and to have reproductive problems. So, and on Maui, we've hardly begun to even look at toxicity or endocrine disruptors is what that sex change kind of effect is called. And reproductive changes, we have not even begun to investigate that. We're still looking at nitrogen and bacteria, which are kind of the first layers of the onion that you peel off, because the testing is more expensive for the toxics.
So it's interesting that this could not only be very damaging to our health, but it's also such an economic issue with what the coral reef's value is in our visitor industry and for Hawaiian cultural practices, the fishing and recreational users, all of those things. I know we're just about out of time for this segment. I think we're going to need to come back and explore this in greater detail, but you did touch on the staph infections, the health concerns. I think next we're going to go down to Kahului Harbor. We'll be speaking with Tim Lara, who's the chairman of Surfrider Maui, and also Karen Chun with Save Kahului Harbor to talk more about what those recreational users are finding regarding their health. So again, fascinating issue, and definitely to be continued.
Well, I hope to come back and talk to you about the results of the microbiological studies that are ongoing in these areas.
Excellent. We'll definitely be back on this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.